Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the last day of the University of Minnesota Extension Pollinator Habitat webinar series. Thank you for joining us for this webinar series. Today, Sam Talbot will be presenting his presentation, Navigating Natives, Tools and Resources for Starting a Pocket Prairie. And now, just like the previous 2 days, I'd like to just briefly go over how we can all interact with each other in this Zoom webinar format. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions you may have. And I'll be asking Sam questions from that section. For any comments, please use the chat feature. As a reminder, these presentations will all be recorded, and I'll be emailing those recordings out in the resource email tomorrow. I will also include all the links that have been shared during the presentations in that email. And there are so many great resources, and we want to make it easy for you to find them again. And also at the end of today's webinar, so when Zoom closes out, your browser will automatically open with our final survey. It's a quick six question survey that will help us put together future programming about pollinators. So it really helps us to get all of your feedback. Next slide, please, Sam. I'd also like to recognize our wonderful extension team again. We don't have them all on the screen here, but I'd like to verbally recognize them because they're an awesome team and they're quite easy to brag about. So Claire LeCan is a local extension educator in Rice and Steele counties. Robin Trott is a local extension educator in Douglas County. Myself, my name is Tara Young, local extension educator in Hubbard County. Shane Bougea, Blue Earth and Le County local extension educator. Troy Salzer with St. Louis County educator. And joining us again, the speaker on the first day, Julie Weisenhorn, horticulture educator. And with almost 1,500 people registered for this webinar, it truly takes a great team to run it. So I'm very thankful for them. And we have a special guest today. So before we get started with Sam's presentation, our special guest is joining us to talk about the Bumblebee Atlas program. So Dr. Elaine Evans is a University of Minnesota Extension educator and researcher working on pollinator education and research relating to bee conservation. Given the interests of our audience, we wanted to share more information about this Bumblebee Atlas program. So Elaine, will you tell us more?
Yes, happy to share information about this project. So this is a nice thing that you can get involved with if you're really excited about pollinators, you want to do more, you're learning about putting in plants, which is super important. That's great. We also still need information about a lot of pollinators. So this is a way for you to help scientists and land managers to know where on the landscape to best put habitat to help bumblebees figure out locations for some of these rare bees that are difficult to find. And so I'm talking about here the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas, but this year we're actually becoming part of a Midwest Bumblebee Atlas. So I'm seeing in the chat, there's people from other states. This Midwest Atlas is also going to be happening in Iowa, Nebraska, and Missouri this year. There are similar Atlas programs in North and South Dakota, in the Southeast, in the Pacific Northwest. So wherever you are, take a look into the Bumblebee Atlas program to see if there's one near you. And this is a program where we have training for people to get to know bumblebees and then go out and survey bumblebees and survey the habitat that they use. You can go to the next slide. So for all of these atlases, here is showing what's happening in Minnesota, but in the other states, we have the states all divided up into grids that you adopt. And then after you have some training, we have an in-person training planned for May 20th at the Arboretum as part of the Gathering Partners Conference. We also have one planned for early June. We actually just set this after I sent in the slides for June 10th. So keep an eye out for that. We'll have online training too. So if you're not able to make it to either of those, we can do the full training fully online. We also have training available just on pre-recorded video videos, but we do hope that you have some interaction with us to help answer the questions. So what you do is you adopt a grid, you find a good spot to go survey bumblebees, and you go out 3 times a year for 45 minutes of survey time, catching bumblebees, chilling them down, photographing them, and sharing those photographs with us, as well as getting some habitat data. So it's a great way to get out with the bees and the flowers, which is a great thing to think forward to right now and is incredibly helpful. In Minnesota, we've been doing an atlas like this for the last 5 years. We've found many new locations for the rusty patch bumblebee, which is an endangered species. So that's really exciting. We're also getting great data that can help us know about where we need more habitat and where bees are kind of doing better than other places where they might need more help. So really important data. Hope that that you can join us. Someone said Wisconsin. Wisconsin does have their own bumblebee brigade program that's run through the DNR there. So make sure to catch up with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Elaine. I think this program really provides our audience with a great next step, after they finish completing installing their pollinator habitat. So I think it really fits nicely. So thank you for coming on today to give us just a brief glimpse into what this program is. But if you are interested learning more about the Bumblebee Atlas, Elaine and our team are in the process, like she said, of planning these in-person Bumblebee Atlas training workshops. So stay tuned. In addition to those workshops, we're also working with Dr. Katie Lee, the University of Minnesota Extension educator, working with honeybees to provide 4 hands-on beekeeping workshops. For right now, one is in South Central Minnesota, 1 in Central Minnesota, and 2 in Northeastern Minnesota. So there are many exciting hands-on programs that are in the works right now, but we'll be sure to keep everyone up to date about the in-person programming that will be coming off or being offered this summer. So thank you, Elaine, so much. For another thing that we'd also like to talk about is for all the beekeepers in the audience, we are also hosting a Varroa mite webinar in March. So basically all this information, I know there's a lot coming at you right now, but all this information and more will be sent to the email that you registered with in that resource email. It is going to be a jam-packed email, as I keep saying, but be sure to keep an eye out for that for tomorrow. So now on to Sam's presentation that we've been waiting for. So Sam is a local extension educator in Dakota County. In his role, he manages the county's plant propagation program to enhance native habitat restoration efforts and provide support for the Dakota County Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Program. He brings his experience and passion for finding science-based solutions to the challenges of growing plants, while also engaging volunteers and stakeholders. Although Sam's early career in ecology involved land conservation in the foothills of the Berkshires, he soon discovered his passion for prairies as soon as he moved to Minnesota. We are ready for you when you are, Sam.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today to chat about pocket prairies. As Tara mentioned, ever since I moved to the Midwest, I've just been just completely fascinated by prairie ecosystems, especially coming from forested Northeast. It just has this brand new palette of species for me to explore. And then so growing plants with Dakota County and working with the master gardeners, I've gained a lot of information and experienced working in these different biomes. So the nice thing about prairies and establishing pollinator habitat is that you can approach it at really any scale and any level of expertise. So that includes your backyard. So today I'll give a review of some of the tools and resources available to sort of get you started establishing a little pocket prairie on your property. All the materials that I reference are available online, and then, as Tara mentioned, we'll send out a list of links after the webinar. So I'll just get started with some quick background on our prairies here in Minnesota. And then I'll jump into some of the things you can consider if you want to install some of this habitat. So why is it important? I really like this illustration here on the right. You may have seen it before, but it really shows just how much of the biomass is below ground. The part of the prairie that we don't see, but does a lot of the work for the ecosystem. So when you can contrast that with Kentucky bluegrass there, your turf grass on the left, not really putting down too much biomass and really staying right at the surface of the soil. So those deep roots allow the water to filter down into the aquifer, opens up those soil pore spaces, improving water quality, and then sequestering carbon, enriching the soil, preventing erosion. So they really they anchor really well and can withstand the disturbances of the prairie. And then, of course, all that structure functions really well for wildlife, so providing shelter and food source. So all these benefits, and then of course pollinators, and that's why we're here today. So about 80% of the bees that we have that are native to Minnesota are generalists, so they're going to be going after pollen and nectar sources that are whatever is sort of abundant and resource rich. While the rest are specialists, so they're going to be going after the pollen and nectar from a specific genus or species of plant. And then, so if that bee is removed from the ecosystem, the plant can't reproduce as well. And if that plant is removed, then the bee goes away. So we want to do everything we can to provide a diverse selection of pollen and nectar sources through these native plants throughout the landscape. Prairie is also an endangered ecosystem. We have less than about 2% of the original 18 million acres of native prairie in the state. You can see in the yellow where it originally occurred along the west, southwest, southern portions of the state. And then contrast that with the red. So that's where our 2%, the remnant prairies, and these remnant prairies act as sort of a blueprint for us to reconstruct them. So we can look at what are the species that remain and what are those site conditions, and then we sort of mimic that when we go to plant them out in large restorations or even in our backyard. And yeah, so these habitats are formed by disturbance, and they tend to occur where rainfall is generally lower and summer temperatures are higher compared to some of the other biomes that we have in the state. And they're also formed by these different disturbance regimes. And so when restoring prairies on the larger scale and even at the smaller scale, we mimic these disturbances. So we want to bring back just not the plant communities, but also the fire, the grazing, and when we can't necessarily do a prescribed burn on all sites, and we can't bring back bison on every site, though we would want to. We can use other tools and techniques, mowing, removing that thatch, to essentially mimic those disturbances. And then what is a pocket prairie? It's a really general term, but mostly refers to areas that are less than 1 acre. Larger than that, you're going to start to require larger equipment and different methods. So it's kind of a threshold where it's a little bit more manageable, and I'll talk about those methods and approach for something that you might see in this photo here, where it's a little bit smaller and a little bit more manageable with when you're working with hand tools and you're not bringing in larger equipment, but still enough room for diversity. So, you know, I mentioned before, we want that bring back the biodiversity of our native prairies. And then mimicking the structure and function of a larger prairie. So our tall grass prairies can be up to 80% grasses. But because we're valuing pollinator habitat, it's okay to go more wildflower forb heavy in our species mix. But you do still want to have those grasses, those native grasses. So those are going to provide habitat for overwintering eggs, caterpillars, pupae. The thatch at the base of some of these grass clumps is ideal protection for predators in our cold Minnesota winters. And then because we're talking about particularly prairie habitat, we want light-filled areas. So 6 hours or more for the community of plants that we're going to be planting. But that doesn't mean that you can't use natives anywhere else. You can pretty much find native plants for any particular site, as long as you can grow plants there. So, yeah, for these sites, we're looking for a little bit more light filled. And then choosing your site, maybe you have something in mind. I really like this, the native plants for the small yard, just for inspiration. It could be anything right outside your door, along your boulevard, getting down into wetter areas. It'll sort of depend on, the site will sort of dictate what plants will be able to grow there. And we'll go over how you can figure that out, how you can find those species. And over time, your prairie will probably look a little bit less landscaped than some of these illustrations, as it sort of naturally fills in and the species sort of compete with each other for space, and eventually it'll get not no maintenance, but certainly low maintenance. And then it doesn't have to be in your backyard. If you have the opportunity to convert some turf grass, say along a median, if you have access to those types of properties, to manage them. And then this is a really great example. One of my favorites is over by the Visitor Center at Lebanon Hills down here in Dakota County. Our amazing volunteers have started this pocket prairie that also functions as a propagation bed. So we collected seed from remnant prairie throughout the county, grew them in the greenhouse, and then planted them there. So that way we're not going back to these remnant sites, which can be sensitive to erosion, and it's great access. It's along a trailhead, so provides that nice, beautiful colors throughout the year too. And then once you have your site in mind, you want to learn a little bit about its characteristics, and then that way you can use that information to choose your species. So we usually think of soil moisture in these different categories: dry, mesic, wet. Those wet areas will tend to be more of your rain garden areas. But if you're having standing water, a few hours after a rainfall, you're looking more at those wetter species. Drier sites are going to be really well drained, usually sandier soils, and mesic somewhere sort of in between. And some, just kind of like pollinators, some species are obligate wetland and some are obligate upland dry areas. So you'll sort of want to match those, and I'll show you kind of where you can find some of that information for our species in Minnesota. Slope and aspect. Slope you'll want to consider when you're installing plants, especially if you're seeding into bare ground. You don't want those valuable, expensive native seeds to wash away. So just considering when you're doing your site prep. Light availability, as I mentioned, and then weediness. Knowing which ones are annual weeds and perennial weeds is really, really helpful. There's information on the extension, Minnesota's UMN extension website, to ID those. And then, because the more you remove those weeds in the beginning, the easier it is when you go to install and maintain your prairie. So we have these different characteristics there on the left. And then here's two sites that I use all the time, MinnesotaWildflowers.info. This example is comparing that with Prairie Moon using Liatris aspera. So Minnesota Wildflowers has all the ecological information that you might need. So again, if you look at that habitat, that's where you're going to match it to your site. So dry prairies would be those, but this one's more a little bit of a generalist too. So open woods along roadways. If you can tend to find it along roadways, it'll usually grow pretty much in a lot of sites. And then at the very bottom there, the county distribution, that's really important for matching sites that fall within your particular range. And then Prairie Moon has all the more horticultural information. So everything you need to know for growing those species, and it has some, I like their advantages, 1, 2, so if it's good for birds, pollinators, deer resistant. So not only matching it to your site, but what your goals are as well. And then getting into choosing species. And this, I mean, for me is the fun part. So getting to know what's native. I like this example here. This is over at Lone Rock Trailhead in Farmington. Extension has set up some of these informational interpretive signage at different pollinator gardens. So you can see exactly what's growing in that garden and then what pollinators are going to be using it. So if you're a very much hands-on, I want to like see this in action. These are really good examples. But yeah, any getting out to arboretums, natural lands, and visiting those throughout the year too. And if you use like a Plant ID app, I mean that's just as great, or tried and true field guides. And then volunteering. Down at Dakota County, we have volunteer opportunities throughout the season, which is really nice to get to know plants, not only during the growing season, but if you're collecting in the fall, they look a lot different. And then building some of those propagation skills and experience, and then you can apply those to your own garden. But keep an eye out for volunteer opportunities with different organizations, because yeah, those are just really great opportunities to learn more. Looking through seed mixes. So you probably have come across some of these online. Again, I use Prairie Moon Nursery just because it's one of the most common in the state, but there's a lot more. I'll give some information a little bit about how to find the different native plant and seed vendors. But yeah, you can usually find native seed mixes for a variety of different sites and a variety of different goals, as I mentioned before. So sometimes if you're looking for, bird habitat or that deer resistant mix, you can find those too. And this takes a lot of the guesswork out. And you can usually, if you're working with a nursery or a vendor, figure out the size of your site and then how much seed you'll need of that particular seed mix. So the pre-designed ones are really great to just kind of get an idea. And even if you aren't purchasing those seed mixes, it's a really good way to kind of see what assemblages of plants that experts have already put together. And then there's the kit options. This one's from Minnesota Native Landscapes. Sort of out of the box, gives you everything that you need, equipment, and then they'll ship the plants in the spring. It's kind of similar to like a meal kit where you get all the ingredients and then you're good to go. So I like this example. If you're just getting into it and you're like, I just want to start with something simple. So yeah, I really like those, that option as a starter kit. And then kind of going the other end of the spectrum where you're like, I feel a bit confident. I want to kind of create my own species list. Julie had mentioned this one, and I completely agree with her that the plants for Minnesota bees from the Minnesota Bee Lab is excellent, especially if you're here in the state, and then laying out the different characteristics so that you can match them back to your site. And then bloom time is really important because you want to have those early bloomers, mid, late bloomers to capture all the needs of the different pollinators. So that's a really good one. This is another one, dry site native plants for pollinators out of the Tufts Pollinator Initiative. And you'll probably come across a lot of these different species lists as you're searching along. I did want to, so this one's great and they have a lot of great information, but because they're Tufts, they're more an East Coast centric list. So you want to choose species that are native to your region. So all these ones are native to Minnesota, except for seaside goldenrod. And the way that you can find that out is if you go to the Biota of North America program, or BONAP as it's known. Excellent resource. Again, I use this one all the time to figure out ranges. So they determine this based on mostly herbarium records, I believe. And then the dark green is at state level presence data. But you can see this is an East Coast species. But then if you went to Minnesota wildflowers and you're like, oh, I really want a goldenrod for a dry site, you can search Solidago, and you'll find that maybe gray goldenrod is a good alternative that's local to Minnesota. And then avoiding non-natives and cultivars. This is more of a suggestion, especially if your goal is to restore native prairie. And I would argue that there's plenty of native options. So one reason that we want to avoid non-natives is sometimes there's negative effects negative effects to the pollinators. So this is just one example. Black swallowwort, it's in the milkweed family. So monarchs will lay their eggs on swallowwort, even if there's milkweed in the prairie next to it. But then the larvae won't feed on the black swallowwort. Whereas if they were on the milkweed, on the Asclepias, they would. So it's sort of a dead-end host. And we see this sometimes with our non-natives. The pollinator will see it as an opportunity, but it really isn't. So this is a little bit more on the extreme side, but just to kind of point out that sometimes, even if it's of the same family or a similar species, it just doesn't function the same way. So if you want to use cultivars or nativars, maybe do a little bit of research. Is that variation because of showy flowers, or is it more increased pollen or nectar production? So there's some options there. But it's always safe to just go with the natives, and the natives and the pollinators have evolved together over thousands of years. So it's a pretty good system so far. And then diversifying your planting. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of can group these plants. So I, say grasses and sedges, and then wildflowers. I'll use wildflowers and forbs interchangeably. But with your grasses, you can think of it as short grasses, tall grasses, cool season, warm season. But if you're thinking of it, in sort of aesthetics, how you want to lay it out, the short grasses are really nice along sort of the front of your prairie, then some of these tall grasses towards the back. Some of them are referred to as bunch grasses, so they'll kind of, you've probably seen those throughout the landscape, especially in landscaping. They'll create those clumps, and some spread throughout. So just know that there's a lot of different characteristics depending on kind of what you're going for. But again, if we're shooting for that 30 to 50% grasses versus wildflowers. And then cool season, warm season wildflowers. And I kind of broke it out into, and these are just a few examples. Broke it out this way because the cool season wildflowers are nice. They're coming out early in the season. And those early season nectar and pollen sources sort of set the foundation for healthy bee populations. So you have your emerging queen bumblebees and other solitary bees coming out early on. And then you want to provide that food source throughout the rest of the growing season. And then even into fall, where you're going to have a lot more of your asters. And then you have some really nice colors throughout the year. So figuring out which species you want when you go to a source like Minnesota Wildflowers or a nursery website, or whatever your favorite wildflower guide, choosing species that looking at the different bloom times and kind of spreading those throughout the year. So I know before there's a lot of questions about sourcing plant material. One of my favorite lists is the Minnesota DNR list of native plant suppliers and landscapers. And this is broken down by regions within the state, and then it's kept up fairly regularly. So this is just a small sample from a fairly extensive list. And again, they also code it or break it down into upland, aquatic, and shrubs and trees. So those upland perennials, if you're looking for more of the prairie species, those are the ones to go for. But great resource if you're looking for shoreline or wetland restoration type stuff. And then again, B-Lons too, with some more information. So yeah, you can check out their that site. And then Wild Ones. This one's really great because it's a 2-pager. Again, we'll send out these links, or you can even search online for it. But yeah, this one's just a 1-2-pager. So it's nice to have if you're volunteering or tabling, or talking with folks, and they're wondering where to get this. So each of those sites, they have some more information about what you can get there. Is it an online retailer? Will they ship? Do they have an in-store retail space? Stuff like that. So I find that one to be a really great resource. And then, of course, supporting your local plant sales. So in the spring, highly recommend looking for one near you. A lot of plant sales are offering more and more natives, and some plant sales are specifically just for natives. It's a great way to learn what's available and also support organizations. And the Minnesota, I didn't have it on here, but the Minnesota State Horticultural Society website, they'll usually put a lot of these plants, the plant sales, on their calendar. So mostly those will occur in the spring. And then there's a couple of things to be aware of when you're sourcing seeds. It's good practice to source as local as possible. That's sometimes difficult, or you might not even know where these suppliers are getting seeds, which is totally fine. It's just sort of a guide, but natural resource practitioners usually tend to try to source within 150 miles of where they're restoring prairie. You can often ask a vendor, or just a general rule is to try to purchase from as local as possible. And then check to see if they're using any particular insecticides that are going to be harmful to pollinators. So like neonicotinoids, which are poisonous to pollinators. Some of the big box stores might use them, but a lot of the reputable native plant suppliers will be using these types of chemicals. But again, it's always good to check. And of course, collect your own seeds. This requires some, pretty decent plant identification skills. Always get permission before collecting. One example is to, request permission from a landowner if you want to collect along roadways. This is where a lot of those, some of those intact prairies happen to be, and they're easy to access. You want to always collect 1/3 of the site or less. You want to leave some for wildlife and for the plants to reproduce. And then timing can be very difficult. I know this has come up. This question has come up before. Is when do I know when things are available? So the Tallgrass Prairie Center, they have the seed collecting from Tallgrass Prairie guide. So there's a bunch of information, and they have these nice Gantt charts to sort of guide you. And that's going to vary greatly depending on the year. Is it a dry year? Depending on your zone. But at least this kind of gives you an idea of when some of these species are going to be available. Of course, you can always grow your own. So indoors, just note that native prairie plants have evolved to grow at just the right time. So that often means that they need to go through that first winter, and we can mimic that with stratification. So putting the seeds in moist sand or vermiculite, and that's based on the germination code. So that'll be either 30, 60, 90 days. There's a few other long-term ones that have to go through a couple seasons. Again, finding out more about how to start native seeds. Prairie Moon, again, is just a really great resource for that. And there's a bunch of different guides online, but just know that with native seeds, you have to sort of usually break that dormancy. With the grasses, you usually don't need to stratify, but yeah, just something to know. You find that germination code, a lot of information on how to start those. And then usually what I do is I'll start this time of year in my trays. I like to just start them in these 10-20 germination trays. Some species you have to surface sow, they need light to germinate. And I would say the majority will get planted just below the surface of the soil. And again, all that information is available through the nursery or the vendor that you purchase your seed from. And then from here, I would probably pot up to cells or to cones. And of course, milk jugs, it's not too late. It's getting towards the end of the time frame to do some winter sowing. But if you're not familiar with this, is a great way. You don't have to worry about stratifying. You just let nature do the work. And essentially, you're making just a mini greenhouse out of recycled plastic containers. And then in the winter, you just you put your medium in there, sow your seeds, water it, leave the cap off. And then in the spring, you can transplant into pots or into your site. And this is, yeah, just another pretty fun, pretty low resource way of starting your seeds. So there's still time this year. Seeds versus plugs, I'll go through this briefly. Seeds are going to be less expensive, but they require good seed to soil contact for germination. So you need you need site prep, and I'll talk about some of the methods for that exposes the soil. And then when you spread your seed, you rake it in. We want to make sure that the seeds are able to germinate that way. Whereas with plugs, you can do all of your weed management with cardboard and or mulch, and then plant directly into that. But you can't really sow seeds that well into mulch because you need that good soil contact. Seeds overall are going to take longer to germinate. Some take several years, depending on the species. With plants, you'll get the faster establishment and faster blooms. Sowing in the fall is really good for wildflowers if you're doing seeds, because they tend to need that overwintering. The grasses tend not to, so you can sow those in the spring. Just a general rule is, you can do like a frost seeding too, where you're seeding right before that first snowfall. And spacing for plants is generally about 1 foot to 18 inches, but you can go up to about 3 feet. With seeds, and a couple of tips, mixing with inert material to help spread it, so you're bulking it up. If you have a small area that you're seeding into, relatively small area, you want to make sure you get good coverage, because a lot of these seeds are really small. And then with plants, making sure that they're getting enough water. Once they're established, you don't have to worry too much about watering, but in that first growing season, it's really important to get them established. So if you're not getting a lot of rainfall, making sure that you have the ability to water those plugs in. Two really great guides. I'll talk about just a few of the different site preparation methods, but I highly recommend Principles and Design for a Residential Pollinator Habitat, and also checking out the Lawns to Legumes program if you're not familiar. And then the other one is Organic Site Preparation for Wildflower Establishment, and that's through Xerxes. Both of these guides, especially the Xerxes guide, is for sites relatively small, so maybe less than 1,000 square feet or so, all the way up to 1 acre or 2 acres. So if you're thinking of larger site and larger prairie restoration, these guides can help you with that. Again, once you get into the very large restorations, you're looking at different methods. And I'll go over briefly three different methods. solarization, sheet mulching, and then removing lawn and reseeding or planting plugs. You can also use herbicide. I left that one out just because I don't have as much experience with it. But you can find plenty of guides where if your site preparation, you can use like a spray treatment. And the goals of all these methods is to essentially create an area that is as weed-free as possible, because then later on it makes it so much easier and a lot less weeding. So solarization, essentially, it's recommended that you use clear plastic over black plastic, and you put that down over your area. Tape up any seams, bury the edges about 4 inches into the ground, and essentially you're heating up all of those weeds and those weed seeds, and leaving it throughout the year, throughout the summer rather. And then patching any holes, because essentially if the weeds do start growing up, they're going to have a really good time. So you want to make sure that you cover those. And then if you have a lot of weed pressure at your site, you can leave it for an additional year. But otherwise you would remove that plastic in the fall. You don't want to cultivate, because then you'll expose any of the weed seeds in the seed bank. But you can then seed or plant into that area. Oh, and I should have mentioned, sorry, before you put the plastic down, you'll want to mow the vegetation down. And again, a lot more detail in those 2 guides that I had mentioned. And then sheet mulching, you're probably familiar with this method, the lasagna method. With native plants, you don't necessarily need as much of that nitrogen based the compost or manure, just because native plants have evolved to grow in not necessarily resource poor, but they don't need those higher nitrogen levels. So, but you can mow your grass down really flat, aerate the compacted soil if needed, and then deeply water any dry soil, and then start adding your layers. So at the very least, you want cardboard and your mulch, and you want to water each continuous layer while adding it. You can leave that, pretty moist through the first year, and then plant that fall or in the spring. This one you wouldn't really seed. If you're seeding into, you wouldn't want to use this method. This is more just for plugs. And then removing sod, again, pretty straightforward. You can, rent one of these sod cutters, but you'll want to rake the site. If you're seeding into it, rake it first, seed, and then rake a little bit more. And I'll show just an example of that in a little bit. But and you can always build back up some of the topsoil. If you have any deep tap-rooted annual or perennial weeds, then you want to remove those completely, because any of the rhizomes that you leave behind can sprout back up. So the sod cutter won't completely make it weed free if you have some of those deep rooted areas. And then planting design. So if you're going to be planting plugs or plants, I like this one from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. So we kind of already went through how you get to this step where you've chosen your species. And I would say maybe with this one, if you're doing a pocket prairie, maybe some more grasses, but essentially this one's nice where you have different bloom times throughout the year. You kind of know the different heights and how large each species is. And then when you go to lay them out, a few things to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, for aesthetics, you can always have those low ground cover, shorter grasses, sedges along the edges, grouping species. So that's it makes it better for pollinators to forage more efficiently. And then, having those bloom times again throughout the year. And this example is for an 8-foot by 20-foot bed, just to give you some perspective. So actually start digging into the dirt. This is the exciting part. So yeah, laying out your plugs based on that planting design that you come up with. Again, just a general rule is just make sure that you group species together. Maybe 4 or 5 plugs of the same species in one area. I like to use, for larger areas, these auger bits work really well. Otherwise, just a trowel, regular trowel, and then evenly spacing. If you set it up in a grid, and then that helps for weed identification later on. So anything sort of outside your grid is a potential weed. And then over time, it'll look pretty uniform, but over time as stuff starts to fill in, it'll kind of create that more natural prairie look. Plant, just below the soil surface, and then use some of that soil to kind of pack the plug into the ground. Because when you plant it, it's only going to be able to access water from the potting soil until it can reach out into the surrounding ground. So you want to make sure that potting soil doesn't dry up. So you want to kind of cover it up right around the edges of the plant, and then water immediately, maybe a couple times a week for that first month. And then if you're not getting an inch of rain, you want to go out and water. You can always check if it's dry below, about an inch into the soil, then it probably needs some more water. And then you really don't have to fertilize native plants. At least I've never had to in my experience. For seeds, again, having that exposed soil, good site prep, reduce as much weeds as possible. Late in the fall or early spring, dormant seeding is, that done right after the first frost, but before the ground is frozen. Mixed with a carrier, so sawdust is a really good one. And then do the rake, broadcaster seeds, rake again, just to get that good seed to soil contact. And then use a soil roller if possible. It just really helps to compact it and keep those seeds in place. So lastly, just the maintenance type stuff. For mulch sites, hand weeding, that's when it gets really important to be able to identify what's a weed and what's native. So, at least a month while things are getting established. And then eventually, hopefully, it looks like that lower picture down below. So you can refresh your mulch, but over time it'll break down, the plants will fill in. So for aesthetics, if you want to keep mulching, that's fine. But otherwise, the idea is to have all of your natives fill in so you don't get that weed pressure. For seeded sites, it can help to mow when the weeds reach 12 inches. So especially for annual weeds. So you won't be hurting the seedlings because they're going to be putting down those deep roots. But you still want to set your mower height pretty high, 4 to 6 inches. And so what that does is you're sort of exhausting the seed bed of those annual weeds because you want to mow them before they go to seed, before they set new seeds. And then all you're getting is your annual natives coming back up. So you can kind of see in this picture the third year prairie on the right, where that first one is getting mowed at that 12-inch mark. And then pull or spot treat deep rooted perennial weeds. You just want to make sure be cautious of overspray if you're using herbicide to treat those perennials. And if you're pulling weeds and you have delicate first or second year seedlings, just be aware that those aren't coming up with your perennial weeds. And then last, burning. Burning is great for prairies, but requires proper training, equipment, burn permits. You can't use it at every site, but when possible, I highly recommend. So larger sites, you can break it up into thirds if possible. That gives some refugia for wildlife and insects so they don't get burned. And then you want to burn mostly in the spring. But again, it does require quite a bit just to get set up, or you can always contract out your burns. But if burning is not possible, you can always mow and rake away the material. And essentially what you're doing is you're mimicking what a burn will do, and you're exposing those early season low wildflowers, so they have a chance to sprout up. You're also exposing the seed bank for new germination in the spring. So these are all the resources. Again, these will all be sent out, or at least the resources that I mentioned today. There are so many other great resources out there, but hopefully this gets you started thinking about how you can bring native prairies into your own neighborhood. With that, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. This is really great. And hopefully this gives you some inspiration for planting native plants. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam. That was a super informative presentation. It took us through every step in the process. So I think you answered a lot of questions, but we still have a lot more for you. So let's jump into them. So how many pocket prairies does my neighborhood need to plant to draw the attention of, let's say, monarch butterflies and other beneficials? If we just have 2 small prairies among swaths of grass, will they notice it and come to it? Or should we convince all of our neighbors to join us?
That's a really great question. And I don't know if I have the answer. I would say the more, the better, obviously. And yeah, and maybe someone else on the panel would have an idea, but is there sort of a threshold for what you need? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Sam, that's a great question. And I don't think we have a very accurate, perfect answer to that. I will add, and Claire, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is some more research with something that they call landscape complexity. It's kind of a scientific term where they kind of mention like different types of habitat and whether it's nice for insects. A lot of the research that I'm familiar with is with beneficial insects. And they kind of mention like a threshold of around 20% of a certain area or radius being in some sort of plant or different type of landscape might be helpful. But that's a really good question. I don't think there's a great hard and fast answer to Sam.
Yeah, and I bet it would depend on if of your vicinity to maybe a larger prairie or natural area as well. But no, that's a good point, Jane.
I think also the more that you can create pathways for those insects to flow from one landscape to the next. Thinking of, I happen to know the person who asked this question, thinking of your front yard and how it flows into your neighbor's next yard. I mean, thinking of creating those pathways is one way to ensure, or I guess better ensure, that you're going to see those beneficial insects. The bigger the spaces, the bigger the masses, the more, the easier it is for them to find them.
So it sounds like the normal extension answer, it depends, as we've always said. But thank you for all of your input. Any thoughts? Sorry, Claire.
Maybe not completely, it depends, because I would just also say that I've always been told even one more flower is good, right? It's certainly not going to hurt. So, I mean, the answer is yes, your 2 small prairies probably should be noticeable, and yes, convince your neighbors to join as well.
And there's mental benefits too. I think we can all agree.
Sounds great. This one's interesting. Any thoughts on native plants versus plant migration due to climate change, basically adopting nearby natives from adjacent regions as our climate begins to change?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something that we're thinking about like just within ecology. So the idea of assisted migration, should we be sourcing seeds from well, there are 2 thoughts there. Should we be assisting species that don't actually occur currently in our region? The answer is maybe. We just don't know if we're, if we're like, oh, we want these species that occur maybe in Iowa, up here in Minnesota. There really is no straight answer. There is current work being done to assist genetics. So essentially collecting seeds from southern Minnesota and then growing them out and planting them in northern Minnesota, but within their range. So it's like essentially assisting genetics within the same range. And I feel like that's safer. And I think that's, so the assisted migration project, exactly. But again, it gets, I don't know, a little bit interesting if you're talking about moving species outside their range. So
Sounds like there's a lot of experimentation that needs to be done.
yeah.
Someone said, for bee forage, is it best to clump the same species of plants together versus interspersing the flower species?
That's my understanding, but I'm sure maybe someone else can confirm.
Yeah, so the bees will forage on the same plant and they'll it's called constancy, and extract the pollen and the nectar from those flowers. So the bigger the mass, the better they'll stay within that. That's why they're such efficient pollinators. They also can find the flowers better than onesie twosie kind of stuff. They have this bigger mass. The plume, if it's a fragrant plant, the plume or the fragrance of the plant is stronger, so they can find it that way also. So yes, planting in masses is a much better approach than planting, single flowers or just a few here and there, is to mass them together and then carry those masses through one after another. So partner, butt them up to each other so that you get that corridor effect. Somebody used that word, which I'm like, thank you for putting that in my mouth. But yeah, and it looks, I tell you what, it's going to look a lot better too. So
Awesome. So Sam, have you ever experienced any salinity problems? Like have you seen the effect of salt affecting pollinator gardens or pocket prairies at all?
Yeah, it's another good question. Not as much in my experience because I've been working mostly in natural areas that are kind of further away from roads, but that's a really good concern. So that's sort of another part of that, like site evaluation and looking up, what plants are salt tolerant as well. But I don't know if there's any other suggestions other than that. But I haven't noticed, like in our trailhead plantings or anything like that, some of the natives that we've used being too much affected. But
I think we only have time for probably one more question, but as I ask Sam that question, I'd like to launch his after presentation poll. So everyone should be able to see that. As he's answering this question, please fill this out. When you are done answering the poll, it should be able to disappear and when you click submit. So thank you ahead of time. We really appreciate your feedback. And back to the last question. Should one go back and remove possible cultivars, nativars, and other region natives, or can we mix them together?
I think we can mix them together. I think being conscious of what it is that they were bred for or why they were selected for is a good way to kind of go about it. I would say unless there's anything that it could potentially have a negative effect on pollinators, then probably for sure you don't want that in your landscape. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts.
I think we came up with that question also during my presentation a couple days ago. And I think the point, and somebody mentioned Doug Talamay, who's an entomologist from University of Delaware and has some terrific books, really awesome books. Bringing Nature Home is the one that I'm recalling. There's a second one too, I think, or a couple more. But in that case, he talks about really diversifying your landscape and having a wide variety of that. And the number that somebody mentioned here was 80% natives. Alan Branhagen says 70%. He's from Arboretum. That's the biomass in your property, but there is room for non-natives. I think you just want to be conscientious of where you're putting them. And especially if you're butting up to some kind of a natural area, you want to keep those non-natives closer to your building, to your home.
No, that's a really great point that, yeah, you can still use non-natives and ornamentals and all those too, but just sort of be conscious of where they are. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was our last question that we're able to get to today. We'd like to thank all of our audience members for participating in this webinar series. I know that I learned a lot from Julie, James, and Sam, and we all hope that you can use this information to create successful pollinator habitats in really whichever way that makes sense to you. It sounds like many of you have a lot of experience with these practices, so it's been a really great group to engage with. So after I close out the webinar, your browser will take you to the short 6-question survey about the overall series. We would really appreciate it if you could give us some feedback, so we'll be able to continue to improve the information that we share in future programs. Thank you all and take care. Stay warm.